Well, this week we've seen the swearing in of a new president and vice president. And 3 weeks ago, we had a new Congress being sworn in. But what does this mean for politics going forward? Well, joining us now to talk about this and more is Zeynab of the group Brand New Congress. Their mission is to elect regular working people to Congress and put people before party to make government more accountable and responsive to the needs of all Americans. Thanks for being with us, Zeynab.
Thank you.
Well, you've had real success in this most recent election. Cori Bush, who was working with Brand New Congress, sworn in as the first Black woman to represent Missouri. And of course, Jamal Bowman, now representing New York's 16th congressional district. Take us through the origins of Brand New Congress, what you're really hoping to do, how it got started, and then we'll talk about what that means going forward.
Yeah, so Brand New Congress was established in 2016. We were actually established and founded by former Bernie Sanders staffers for the Bernie Sanders 2016 presidential campaign. We were founded before the primaries against Hillary and Bernie Sanders. The concept was, at the time, if Bernie Sanders was to get into office, he would need a Congress to back him up on legislation that we were looking to get passed. Our foundations and our benchmark started with the Green New Deal, but issues such as healthcare for all, issues such as immigration reform were also on the top of mind for us as well. If Bernie Sanders wanted to get the agenda, the progressive agenda that was so popular at the time amongst the community and was growing across the country, and then we needed a Congress that reflected that. Also, recognizing that Congress is composed of mostly white, mostly wealthy, and mostly male individuals. Most members of Congress either have a background in law or they have a background in career politics. So what we found is a disconnect between Congress and the people that they serve. Also, with the Citizens United ruling, we've seen campaign finance reform change. We've seen millions and millions of dollars begin to be poured into elections over the last decade and a half. And that's really changed the landscape and dynamic of politics, although we can say Congress has been traditionally composed of people from privilege. So historically, there's always been a disconnect in Congress. And what causes that, and what can we do to fix it? Can people run clean elections, small dollar elections, refuse corporate donations so that they don't have the influence of corporations, so that they don't have the influence of wealthy donors on the decisions that they make when legislation is written? Legislation should never be written by a corporate conglomerate and just passed down to our congressional bodies, whether it be in our state houses or at the federal level. So we initially made a call for regions to select, for districts and states to select people that they believed within their own communities could represent them well in Congress. And when we made that call, we received more than 11,000 nominations. We started filtering through those nominations in 2016. And of course, we met Cori Bush, who was nominated by her community. We met Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We actually, our first conversation with Representative Ocasio-Cortez was when she was driving back from protesting at the Dakota Access Pipeline. She had been fighting for voting rights in her district in New York for quite some time. She had established a nonprofit. She was deeply embedded in her community. And she's really a benchmark. Her and Cori both. Cori stood on the front lines of Ferguson. She was fighting for the rights of Black women and Black and brown bodies in her community. She was a pastor. She had deep connections and deep ties, and she was also a nurse. So being a mental health nurse and overseeing several locations, she really had a connection to the people of Missouri's first. And those were the kind of people that we wanted to see in Congress. Folks that are living in the communities, that have gone through the struggle, folks that understand what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, and also support, in part because they have lived through those situations, the kinds of progressive policies that we knew could really impact people's lives in this country, because there's a lot of people suffering, and there is legislation that could come about through our federal legislators that could actually help us. Things like student loan debt forgiveness, immigration reform, criminal justice reform.
Well, I know you're already looking ahead to the next round of elections, albeit we're just drawing a breath from the most recent elections. But what does it take then to get somebody who is working so closely in their community, an organizer like Cori Bush, to the point where they are now in the halls of Congress? There's a lot of work that goes into that, particularly given, as you've outlined, the status quo and the dominance of corporate money in politics at all levels.
That is absolutely a challenge. We believe in the benchmarks of primaries. So we will often primary a sitting incumbent who perhaps has a history of millions of dollars in corporate cash, coffers and coffers of money at their disposal, as well as tools from parties such as the Democratic Party. Since we're progressive, many of our candidates, if not the majority, are Democrats. And we have found that simple access to things like tools and to vendors can be very expensive for a grassroots campaign. So helping to build out the infrastructure and the training for a grassroots campaign makes all of the difference. In 2018, what we found really helped to push our candidates forward. We made huge impacts and strides in Texas. In Texas, in districts where it was maybe a R12, R23, we saw our candidates almost closing the gap and winning. And we've seen a shift in Texas in general in this presidential election in 2020, which we believe some of those impacts were candidates taking up the mantra to run.
Once you have candidates actually elected, you might think, well, your work is done. Let's look for more candidates that we can run in primaries. But what is your work then? What is your relationship with folks like Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's been in Congress for 2 years? Does that relationship continue, particularly because of the support that they need? You mentioned the support network while they are candidates, but what about the support when they're actually serving in Congress? What's your relationship now with these candidates moving forward?
Well, in 2018, we had one candidate win, which we thought, considering that it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that was a massive achievement for the movement and really shifted the dynamics of progressive politics in general. I think not just nationally, but internationally. However, as far as building out, now we have a slate of 4 because we have Rashida Tlaib, and as you mentioned, Cori, Jamal, and we still have AOC. Our brand new Congress representatives, of course, may need a different type of support. They are going to be running in campaigns again in 2022. So it will also be looking forward to their next election run and how we can support them, but also how we can support the initiatives that they're bringing forward right now as an organization. And that is a process now that we have 4 candidates that we are learning and walking through as an organization. We recently supported two pieces of legislation that were proposed by one by Jamal Bowman and one by Cori Bush. Cori Bush's very first resolution that she has brought forward to Congress is to have an investigation within the House Ethics Committee to hold those who had contributed to the insurrection with their rhetoric, with their with inciting inaccuracies and statements that they were making to their constituents to drum up the animosity and the vigor that led to the storming of the Capitol, and possibly other issues where every day there's new news coming out about possible congressional involvement. So it's something that she has asked for those folks to be investigated, for there to be an investigation overall. And if we find that there is collaboration, if we find that there was incitement, that those individuals be expelled from Congress. And we are in full support of that. And We have already joined petitions for her. We've already promoted that resolution, as well as the coup act that Jamal Bowman is looking to pass as well, to for investigations to uncover white supremacy within the Capitol Police. And it goes beyond that to also reinstate, although this isn't in the legislation, this is something amongst discussion, is to reinstate laws that actually, not laws, but policies within our judicial branch and our executive branches that did investigate through the FBI, through the CIA, any type of white supremacist activity within our law enforcement and within Customs and Border Patrol, within ICE. That is something that was appended when Donald Trump came into office. Sessions removed those types of oversights. And so we don't know what type of infiltration of white supremacist groups are within law enforcement, but we do know factually that this happens, and it is an issue in our country. And it is something that we should take seriously and investigate. And that should include the Capitol Police as well as generally across the board. So we are in support of that resolution as well. So we're just now starting to learn, they've only been 14 days in office, but how we can truly support them on the Hill. And we really want to build those relationships and maintain those relationships with our brand new Congress representatives as well.
It does seem that a lot of the work that's being done in this very first week of the Biden administration is undoing some of the damage of the previous administration, signing the US back up to the Paris Climate Accord, other pieces of legislation that were introduced by the previous administration. And I know there's going to be so much energy put towards damage control and just getting us back to where we were in 2016, which was not a great place for many, many people in this country. So given that reality, how do we push forward then progressive platforms and issues like Medicare for all, like the Green New Deal, particularly when there still is very much centrist control in the Democratic Party. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue that Joe Biden or Kamala Harris are progressives themselves, albeit they're speaking certainly the language of progressives right now. So given the reality, how do you see progressive agendas really being put forward in Congress?
Certain issues such as student loan debt forgiveness, tuition-free college to help get us back on our feet, Medicare for all, these are all also tied to relief from the COVID-19 pandemic. These issues, the burden of student loan debt, the fact that healthcare in our country is not necessarily a human right, those are issues that we fundamentally had and that people have suffered from for generations in this country. However, we are seeing it even more compounded by COVID-19. So when we look at passing legislation, the logical step would be some of these progressive reforms that we have been calling for as progressives for more than a decade. It would be also, another aspect would be the fact that racial tension has always been there. Systemic racial issues in our criminal justice system has been there for years. Our issues with immigration and privatized prisons and families being incarcerated for months and detained for months occurred under the Obama administration. It is something that we have talked about rectifying for a very long time. These bills have come across the House floor. Some of them have passed. A great example is the Violence Against Women's Act that for the first time in more than a decade has laid on McConnell's desk for a year and a half without being passed. Now that we have a Democratic House, a majority in the Senate, or a split Senate, and also the presidency, there's no reason that these promises that have been made can't be passed. And the thing that we've seen, for instance, with Medicare for all, studies have shown that Medicare for all in the long run will actually save us money, could be an economic boom for our country. Tuition-free college could help get us more nurses and doctors and scientists to tackle COVID-19. So when we're looking at future projections, when we're looking at climate change and the impacts of it now, it's not a tomorrow problem. It's affecting us today. And that has contributed to areas such as Black and Brown communities across the country being more impacted by COVID, because they're also more impacted by environmental issues. It's all tied together, it's all interconnected. And so when we look at taking robust steps for a Green New Deal, we look at Medicare for All, we look at tuition-free college, all of these things can also help combat the issues with COVID-19. So there is no reason to drag our feet anymore. If we want to save our economy, Congress needs to go in and make the investments in that. Right now, making investments in trillions and trillions of dollars into the military industrial complex is not as effective as dealing with the war that we're in right now, and that is the situation that we're in with COVID-19.
In the last few seconds that we have, Zeynab, I know your work is now beginning to recruit candidates and support them for the next round of elections, and particularly the primary process. So how can people nominate people from their community? What should they look for? How can they find out more about the work you're doing and engage with that?
Yes, so at the end of the month, we will be launching our 2022 nominations process. We are looking for individuals that are activists, community organizers who have been involved in their districts. We're looking for nurses and doctors and scientists and teachers to run for office. We're looking for people who have worked blue collar jobs, but on the side, they're organizing their communities for ballot initiatives. They are volunteering their time for a dozen nonprofits. They serve on boards. They're doing the community work within their own spaces to make change. We are looking to build a more diverse slate. So we're looking, of course, to elect more Black women. We saw Black women and the impact that their voting bloc had in Georgia. We saw the impact their voting bloc had in Texas. We saw the power of Cori Bush in Congress, and we believe that we need more Black and brown bodies in Congress. We need a Congress that's more reflective of the district that they're serving. So individuals that are from the district have lived there. And so we encourage folks to think about people in their communities who have inspired them, who have helped them, who they know have done real work on the ground, stellar organizers, people who have made impacts on the community, regular working people that they believe could really be a voice for them. We say at Brand New Congress, who's repping you? You know, Cori Bush, she has worn Missouri's first on her sleeve since she's been in office. She had a recent photo shoot with Teen Vogue. She requested that they hire a photographer from her district, a designer from her district. She's so connected to the community, and that's the kind of individual that we would like to see in Congress across the country. So when we're looking at nominations, who do you think could represent you? Or do you know someone who's already running or starting a campaign? In 2018, we had to ask people, do you want to run for Congress? Because this had never been done before. The shift that we saw, because people were inspired by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and by seeing regular people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib winning, was that hundreds of people were inspired to run in 2020, regular working people on small dollar campaigns, no corporate donations. So if you know someone who's already running, then we take those nominations as well. We do not accept self-nominations. We only accept nominations from individuals in the community for someone else.
Well, Zeynab Day with Brand New Congress, thank you so much for being with us today.